Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Welcome to this special video about upcoming year 2025. I want to start today's video asking you a question, and you can either think for yourself or just answer in the comments. When do you think the wars end? Because it's a relevant question. The ending of this war has been both expected and projected by many, and even more times the question on whether it's going to be soon or not has been asked all the time. Looking at these numbers, we definitely can say that there is a high tolerance in this conflict for how much casualties can both sides sustain, because this one shows the Russian side, and we see that the casualties are atrocious. It's 655,000 that are stated here as killed, wounded stated around 2 million. I think those are completely made up numbers, but generally speaking, all of these numbers can be disputed. That's not the point. We all know that even if they're not completely accurate, these numbers, even if you can just consider, yes, maybe it's both lost in combat, wounded, everything in those 655, which is closer to actual expectations made by analysts, we do feel that this is a large-scale conflict, and the large-scale conflicts have tendency to go on for a while. But when does the war end? Just recently, President Zelensky has stated that the end of the war is potentially closer than we all expect. It can end quite abruptly. Remember, while there is no official communication between Russia and Ukraine, there is at least some kind of platforms that both Russia and Ukraine are using to negotiate hostage exchanges. So there is a possibility for some kind of consensus to come up. But more important, there is a possibility for one side, and I'm going to argue that that side is Ukraine, to potentially even win in 2025. Because Russia is big. It's a big state in a sense of its geography. And oftentimes we perceive that geographic representation on the globe, on the world map, as something that is also expressing how stable that state is, how it is able to adapt to challenges. Some Russian shills will bring in arguments stating that during the older times, Russians were sending in millions of their troops and they won all of the wars. And it's obviously is false, anyone that knows how to use the search engine. Russia, while big overall, is not as big when you start looking in details. Even if we look in the older times, we look at what was the thing that really allowed people to wage war. And generally speaking, to wage war, a person or a ruler in this case would need only three things: money, money, and money. Because that is what it all comes down to. And arguably for Russia right now, money is running kind of dry. We've talked here and there on this channel about the fact that Russia has been struggling, that the economy of Russia has been having issues. However, some people just didn't really see, like, well, what is it leading to? Like, can it really result in something? And 2025 is becoming this year where, while I don't really feel that we can confidently say that Russian economy will most definitely collapse, but it's a year in which a lot of pointers from all across different dimensions, both economic and actually military ones, which I'm going to touch upon, they're pointing towards 2025 being a very, very hard year for Russia. And some of the analysts are even arguing that what is Russia doing right now in Ukraine, trying to grab as much as they can They're trying to set up themselves for potentially some kind of a political situation in the world in which they're able to exploit some kind of a weakness that is shown by the Western allies to then potentially come to some kind of negotiated non-solution where Russians are able to take care of this land and just maybe rebuild and reinforce their positions. Because looking at military analysts and how Russia is expending their resources, both economic and their military ones, at the front line right now, everyone is stating one very simple word: unsustainable. So I'm going to use this as a base. I've tried recording this video many times and I decided it's not going to be perfect, but I'm just going to roll with what we have here. So I'm going to use as a base this article, which the link to I will leave in the comments section, by Aaslund. And Anas writes here with facts and data with regards to the state of the Russian economy. And his arguments are quoted also by, not quoted by him, but also are expressed by experts that actually know what is happening with Russia. Not those guys that have been stating just how good Russian economy is growing, despite the obvious fact that all of the Russian economic growth in the last couple of years that they nominally put on paper is being generated by Russia just having a war chest that they have prepared. And then they were pulling money from that war chest, and then they've been throwing into their forcefully expanded government military sector. So they would build new factories, put 3 shifts into factories, and finance all of that output by their war chests of money and throwing it at the production facilities. Now, even if you're not an economist, you can easily understand if you have some money in one of your pockets and you just take it out and then put it in your other pocket, that suddenly doesn't mean that you have more money. It's just movement of it. So that's why the argument that I hear a lot that Russian economy is doing very hot is very nicely taken apart here, step by step, by Anas here. He starts by talking about the conference in Kiev, where Ukrainian spy chief Budanov talked about the same thing. They were stating that economic reasons for Russia are becoming so severe for 2025 that it is gonna be putting a lot of pressure for Russia to continue this war. And this is where I want to transition to the main point of this video. While we cannot state definitely when this war will end, what is going to be the outcome, how it's going to happen, what we can say is that sometimes there is the periods of grinding through certain things for changes to accumulate, pressures to grow on both sides, to then suddenly some windows of opportunity for negotiated peace or surrender of Russia can actually come open, and we can come to an ending of this conflict with, for example, what Joe Biden's administration has been pushing a lot for, mounting extreme pressure on Russia, expecting that when that window of opportunity because of that pressure comes, Putin will decide, no more, I cannot do it, I need to go back and pull out of Ukraine, giving up on Ukraine and taking his forces out, factually ending the war. And I expect that 2025 we will indeed see this specific window opening. And it's not only me speaking. Here are Anas, here is Budanov. It's all of the many other people and experts that know what is happening on the front line and with Russian economy. He explains that Russian economy was not that hot already a while ago. It wasn't that hot even around 2014 when Putin invaded Ukraine for the first time. Putin was struggling with his opinion polls in 2014 significantly. He was struggling maintaining support from the Russian population because the life in Russia, the economic situation was so poor. Russian economy was great for oligarchs, kleptocrats, and so on, but there was a lot of social unrest. Annexation and capturing of Crimea created some kind of a consensus opinion around that in Russia, where they grouped around the dictator and they swallowed that pill of, yeah, our lives are tough, really, really bad, but we are a nation of conquerors and we are dominating the world. It fed very strongly into that Russian propaganda narratives about how their country needs to become great again. This is what happens here. And Anas talks about that despite all of that Crimean things, after even Russian invasion in Crimea, when there was majority speaking non-response from a lot of the Western powers, the Russian economy barely, on average, grew at 1% per year from 2014. It has been problematic for Russia. Their GDP, actually, in real dollars, like when you convert it to an actual currency, it actually decreased by 4 trillion yearly output. That is incredible, because in all of that times when our journalists in the West have been painting a picture of this growing superpower that is about to take on NATO, that we must appease Putin with everything that we have, and we need to restart and press the button like the Obama administration did with it, it ended up being a complete failure because the country was actually already having big troubles and imploding into itself. What is more important is that many of the experts, and Anas as well here, is drawing very direct parallels, because the trajectory that Russia is going with now investing more and more into their military production, trying to grow their country's economy by putting the money from wherever they can get the monies, their hands on the money, and building factories that are producing things that are not having any kind of added value. Let me explain. So if you are building some kind of a civilian factory that, for example, is producing cars, then these cars can be used to then help build other things in the economy, transport goods. They're able to then used to move around, to increase the social mobility. Military equipment, while it gives this boost and helps building the production, and it can be a very significant benefit for a country to have a strong investment in a military production because it increases defense. If this is what your core of your economy built on, it's an economy that has something that is called in economics as a multiplicative effect. Essentially, I invest $1 here, and then kind of because it grows, it just sprouts and it's able to produce more than just $1 feedback from it. With ammunition, artillery, military equipment, it's being spent and then it doesn't come back because it gets blown up in Ukraine. Putin has been extremely afraid of debt to Russia. So he was actually relatively smart in his preparation for this war. I'm not saying in general and how he ran the country. No, I'm stating that the agenda of fighting against the Western allies, fighting against Ukraine, fighting against us was very long in his mind. Around the early 2000s, that you might not know, like at the end of the 1990s, Russia suffered a catastrophic collapse of their economy. It was really, really bad. And it was driven by Russia having quite a big external debt. They were not able to actually pay back that external debt. And that is specifically when Putin came to power. He saw that failing nation that Russia after the 1990s was, after all of that problems that they had with debts, and he came to solve this. And he was saved, but not because of his bright mind. He was saved because oil prices skyrocketed. Oil prices is what drew Russian economy to prosper over the years. If you overlap the oil price chart with Russian economy growth, you will just see almost one-to-one correlation. Now, correlation is not causation, but we know that Russian economy is pretty much running on the oil. And this is where the weakness lies for the Russian economy. Oil is not as relevant in this world anymore as it used to. Two major factors are playing on this. Factor number one, there has been a significant increase of oil production in the United States. United States under Joe Biden administration has been doing incredible job to boost its oil output. US is now an absolute home runner in production of oil and oil products. This put a lot of pressure. Now, Russia is part of a specific cartel. That cartel is called the OPEC plus cartel. It consists of countries where they have a lot of oil, and what this cartel does is they try to abuse because they were having a lot of the effect on the oil market. So they would come together and they would say, let's decrease the output that our countries do, and that will, because of how markets work, because of the less supply to the market, the prices for oil will then rise, and everyone here in this cartel will just get more money from selling their oil by having higher prices at the oil. This would allow for countries to increase their budgets, to get better expectations for their economies, yada, yada, yada. The problem is that now, with United States being a major oil producer, now this OPEC plus cartel has been, by the asks of Russia specifically, has been asked to stop producing and putting the oil to market to keep the prices as high as possible. However, for this cartel, the high prices for oil are counted as around 100 or so. If you look at the oil prices that has been in the last couple of years, they were not nearly there. And that is a big problem for Russia, because now the cartel chiefs are saying, we're not getting the prices that we wanted, we're not getting the profits for our countries that we wanted, so we're backing out of the deal. And already recently, there have been news that Saudi Arabia is specifically looking to back out of this deal, and it is known that other cartel members is also going to take steps away from restricting their output of oil. So a lot more oil will be coming to the market, and it will increase the pressure on the prices to shift downwards, which is devastating for the Russian budget. Secondly, China. China was a big driver for oil consumption. It was a growing economy, a massive. It used manufacturing. It did a lot. But then two major things changed. The thing number one is that Chinese economy, it was not very real. Like, it was big, don't get me wrong, but they also screwed with the numbers just a little bit because it's a communist system and they want to lie. They love to lie about the numbers because that makes them feel good and they makes them look good, and that allows them to access to the world organizations that would, for example, give them more money than they should be deserving. And China was using a lot of that. They tried to build a lot of their infrastructure. They tried to build a lot of what they have. And they are very, very dependent on the world market. And the world market is also dependent on them. Everyone was expecting Chinese economy to recover after the last year's poorest performance. There was hopes, and some of the paid Chinese economists, they were telling stories about how well Chinese economy is doing, how they're about to come back and bounce and going to start doing all of these glorious Chinese things as before. Yet that never happened. The problem is that China is a big consumption market for oil. And because their economy is not doing hot, they're not expected to raise or even increase their purchasing of oil, which is still going to stay relatively low. Moreover, Chinese are making very big investments in the electric car manufacturing. There is immense push to shift almost all cars from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles. And that is additional pressure for the need of oil. And China has some oil. Some of the Middle Asian countries, they're supplying arguably enough oil that China needs at this current state with their current shift towards the markets. And Russia right now is not having a good time. Russia is not having good relationship with China. China, despite the fact that maybe they would want to, geopolitically speaking, align with Russia, because of their economy doing poorly, they need to ally with us in a Western force just because we are where the money is. We're their biggest trading partners. They are codependent on this. So when Putin looked at the debt and how that machine worked for the debt, he said, I will not get any debt for Russia. Instead, I will take this oil money that we earned, the super profits from the oil money, and I will put them in a war chest economy. I will put them away and I will close down any foreign loans that we had. So by the end of the 2020, Russia came in with arguably in a global standards with non-existent foreign debt. So they were not owning anyone. And Putin thought that he's in a very safe space, that there is no foreign debt, so there is no issue. They have a lot of money. The problem is right now for Russia is that because of the sanctions, because of their position as a pariah state, they are now almost completely prohibited from loaning any money whatsoever. And that means that while it's good that there is no foreign debt, there is also not a lot of investment in Russia that is expected. So there is not a lot of companies that would like to still get, a lot of countries that would still like to get their money back from Russia. So they're not invested in it. And problem of being a closed economy like this with a big war chest is that if that war chest is going to run out, then you have no money. And because you're a pariah, you actually cannot borrow money. So you do not have the access to money that you need to even stabilize your economy. So it's either what you have saved up or nothing. The reserves of that, liquid reserves of that, it was money and gold. Those are counted as liquid reserves of that war chest have now shrunk to just 55 billion or 2.8% of Russian GDP. So to put it in perspective, if Russian economy underperforms 2.8% in a year, they will not have any money. They had a peak in 2021 of 183 billion in that fund. It's a huge fund. So in the last 3 years, they've spent over 120 billion of this fund to help sustain their economy, to help build their wartime production, to help build everything. This is what they did. And now that money is running out, and people are arguing that 2025 is where that money is going to run out. At the same time, Russia has been known for two things that they're exported. Oil, absolutely. Well, that's like three. Oil, gas, because gas is a byproduct of oil, and military equipment. They were known that they were having huge stockpiles and they had good production of military equipment. So there were countries that were buying that military equipment. The problem is that with the recent Russian changes and how they're performing, they are now arguably the importer of the military equipment. It's very problematic for Russia right now because while they are on paper increasing their military budget, they're stating that we're going to spend even more money on the military next year. Question is, what then? Because I can assure you that maybe like 55 billions that they have, that is a money that maybe can help them get through 2025. But that's it. There is nothing beyond that door. We're talking about the China, and the China is not supporting Russia. Yet you might argue, yes, but from time to time we're seeing some Chinese military products make its way to Russia. But again, they're not helping Russia because of the willingness of their heart. Russia is purchasing equipment from them. Where is the money? And this is not just the economics. If you don't know, there are people like Covert Cabal, HIMARS, or for example, Jompy here, that are counting Russian equipment. I've long time talked that Russian military has, for the most part, has been defeated in Ukraine. What Ukraine is fighting right now is the Soviet Union, basically. They're fighting what was Soviet Union accumulated for over half of a century, being a second world superpower, and they were gathering ammunition, equipment, vehicles to fight the NATO and the whole free world. That was the plan of the Soviet Union. Yet they didn't. And Russia was having all of this legacy handed over to them. And now they're using that legacy to fight in Ukraine. And they're getting some things. They're capturing cities. They're forced to reduce these cities to rubble. Not like Ukrainians. I'm pretty sure you've seen when Ukrainians are entering city, civilians are meeting them up, or at least not resisting if it's a Russian territory. But when Russians are entering cities, well, the only civilians that are there is probably the one that they brought with them, because everything else is bombed to smithereens. There is nothing there. There is no life. It might have been as well as a moon surface. Like, there is no infrastructure, nothing. Russia is gaining zero from these territories. These territories that Russia is capturing now require more investment if they still want to develop them and so on. Some people argue to me, it's like, oh yeah, Russia cannot expand in Siberia because there is nothing there. They will need to invest in the infrastructure and so on. Yeah, but they're capturing territories in Ukraine where is nothing there because they bombed everything, and they will probably need to spend even more money to demine, clear out rubble, and try to build some kind of increased civilized life. And that's not there. But going back to the stockpiles. So Jompy and the other guys, they're counting the Russian ammunition. And it's a great expectation to see how the Russian military is doing, and more importantly the Soviet stockpiles that Russia is running on, because their economy, they cannot output their production to the needs of the military. You don't see Russians riding a lot of the T-90s or the modern air vehicles. You see them from time to time in a singular moments here and there, but you don't see them en masse. And the reason for that is because Russia is stating, well, let's just pull it from the stockpiles. And that's what we can do, because that is the only thing that our production facilities can output right now. Taking vehicles from stockpiles and putting on a battlefield. And Russia has been struggling. Now, you see numbers here that is left on the stockpiles. For example, for tanks, it's 56% that is still left. For IFVs, it's about 55%. And for artillery, it's about 44%. But you know why I like data? Is because I'm a data guy, I'm a nerd. And data talks to me. It tells me the story. For example, when you listen to Jompy and HIMARS, they're stating that if you look at that original number, 6,300, well, at least a third of that number is just rubble. It's a husk of a vehicle that they must count because it technically is on a stockpile. But they're stating that about a third of this number, initial one, is basically just a husk of a vehicle. So you could easily add additional over 2,000 to this number, and then you would see that Russia is not really having a good time with their, for example, tank equipments. And then you look for tanks, for example, and you see that's like, oh, Russia has been running kind of low already on their T-80s, their more modern tanks. And then they've been pulling a lot of T-55s and T-54s. But there is still so many T-64s and T-72s. So Russia still has plenty of things to go. Well, true. But the problem is, if you start Googling, and again, as I said, data talks to me. For me, it's like, I wonder why would they do that? Why would they pull an older tank instead of a newer one? Because that's what you logically think. That like, if I'm pulling a tank, then I'm going to pull the most newer one, and maybe then I will pull the older one. Well, the question is actually quite simple. Because of the same flaw that we know all across the time about the Russian tanks. It's the autoloader. So Russian tanks, by their Russian engineers, to try to cut down on a number of people that they needed to put into tanks, they put an autoloader system right under the turret, in a carousel around the turret. That's why you see so many turret tosses from the Russian tanks. And the same system is also very susceptible to corruption, and it's very susceptible to rusting and susceptible to failure. And the thing is that T-62s and T-54s, T-55s, they did not have the autoloader. They just had the guy being in there, like the same as Western tanks, that would just load the shells. Whereas tanks after that, they're with autoloaders. So when you look at the older tanks with the autoloaders, the fact that they have not been pulling them from the stockpiles can even suggest you that potentially, these tanks are not good. And that's, if you look at the numbers, that's what, like additional 1,500 extra. What is left then? And that's military. And you can extrapolate from all of this. Like if you look at any of the numbers, you can come out to conclusions that a lot of things are pointing us towards 2025, which is likely last year where Russia will still have advantage. Ukrainian factories are kicking into the high gear. Western allies, while slow, are still dedicated to help Ukraine. The factories and investments to Ukrainian factories, because we didn't have stockpiles in the Western world a lot, except for US, are now being built fresh production facilities to build up these stockpiles and build output for weapons. Our money is finally being transferred into the military power. The F-16s, Ukraine has gotten some, but more will come. Weapons, Ukraine has got a lot, more will come. Russia is riding a big legacy of a superpower, and they have been cosplaying that legacy from the day one. I've been talking about this day one. Some people were not believing that I was for real, yet over the years they came to understand that no, Russia is indeed not as strong as it is believed to be. And 2025 gives us a window, a potential that there might be, just might be, someone reasonable in Russia that will look that they're failing on the economy, that they're failing on the military, and despite the fact that some of the arguments are being said that Russia has infinite manpower, if you don't have vehicles to put that manpower in, how are you going to fight? This war has been gruesome, awful, brutal. We've seen things that we can now never unsee. Whenever I talk with some people that are not following this war, I feel just how damaged I am from doing this. Yet I want us all to realize that while it's taking time, while it is absolutely devastating of what's happening to Ukraine and Ukrainian citizens, we must see that there is a window, a chance, a light at the end of the tunnel for Ukraine to win. And we can do it if we continue supporting Ukraine. It goes for politicians and it goes for you. Support Ukraine. Trust in Ukrainian armed forces. I love you, and I'll see you next time.